السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. Inshallah, this evening I want to touch upon understanding the role of the media and social media in events and crisis. We'll mainly use Syria and Gaza, but we'll use other examples too. There's no doubt that in the past 30 plus years, what we term media and the role of the media have taken a drastic change. For a long time, the media outlets that have affected the public opinion about certain issues and the public feelings about certain issues have been mostly in the third world countries, outlet for the governments, يعني أبواق للحكومة, and in the West, mostly independent or belong to a certain party or ideology or a non-governmental organizations or certain representation of on the left or the right, or owned by somebody who's rich, which is still there. I mean, Washington Post is owned by Bezos, who's well-known millionaire Jeff Bezos. So this phenomenon is still there, but the major change happened is with the introduction of the social media, where people no longer need to depend on just calling each other on the phone or talking to each other or passing the information through limited meetings, because an event now takes place and suddenly you find a large gathering downtown. Where did all those people came from? Well, they come from an announcement on social media to a certain group of interest. The Western world cares much about the media because it shapes the opinions and the feelings on a certain issue that would affect, for example, the elections and the direction of a country, going left, going right, being, pertaining to a certain ideology and pushing a certain agenda. So that's basically, in the West, it plays this major role, especially among the so-called democracies, because basically you have free press. True that sometimes free press have its limitation when it comes to the overseas agenda, but that's another issue. While in third world countries, Muslim countries mostly, the media is an outlet for the government. And even if they allow limited media for organizations, it's really within certain bounds and certain limits. When I came to this country, I remember one day a Jewish teacher came to me, and I was wearing the red kafiyya. And she said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I am from Palestine." And I can see it's as if, a snake have bitten. So, she was taken back. She was taken back. But then recomposed herself and asked me how things are there. I said, for the people of Palestine, the things are really terrible. Their land being confiscated, and you have settlements all over the place, and people cannot move freely between cities, and there are checkpoints, and there are thousands in the prison. I mean, with whatever broken English that I had at the time, I just gave this quick summary, but I could see clearly she did not believe anything that I said. I mean, you can see in the reaction, she did not believe anything that I said. I was surprised. I mean, at least she did not ask questions, because I thought that would be, but the way that she, responded with, her impression on while I was talking. So anyway, month passed by when I saw her. This was like spring semester. I saw her during fall semester, and we were on campus. She pointed to me to come. So I went. Of course, I did not know what to expect, because I no longer a student of hers. So she told me, I was in Israel this summer, and I saw what you were talking about. And things have shocked me, because this is not what we learned. And this is not how we were raised. Now, why do I bring this story? Because with the media, classical media, her parents were able to shield her from any information that has to do with the truth in Palestine. It has to continue a series of lies. And starting with the first lie that they were taught in either daily school or weekend school, at the synagogue, or what have you. What they were told basically is this Palestine is a barren land. It's a land of no one. There are only a few people there, and the Jews came and took it over and made it, Jannah on earth, paradise on earth. But there are few of those so-called Palestinians who are terrorists. Their whole objective is to kill Jews. Kill Jews, kill Jews. So this image that was formed in the mind of the young American Jews, with the influence of the home and the synagogue, is a total negative picture on Palestine and the land of Palestine and the people of Palestine. And giving them on the other side this bright picture that Israel is the best thing that happened to the Jews and the world and all of this. Especially when you bring the Holocaust into the equation and says basically now Jews are protected in Israel. The big shift that we have seen in the last 14, 15 months, it was a strong shift. There was some indication before that happened to the young Jews in America, is because it's this shift in the media. Because their parents depends on ABC, CBS, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and so on and so forth. Was the young generation depends on social media, mostly TikTok and its sisters. So they start seeing things that are different. And this is a main point that we need to start with. That media, or whoever run the media, or whoever run the education system in a country, wants the people to see a certain angle. It's very important that the whole educational system and then beyond focus on the people seeing a certain angle. And the media would play along. I'll give you an example. When I came to this country in 1978, what you hear always is Palestinian terrorist, Palestinian terrorist, Palestinian terrorist, Palestinian terrorist. That's the theme. That is the theme. And what about the Muslim fighters? They are freedom fighters. That's how the US media projected the Taliban, or I should say the Afghani resistance. Taliban came on later. They had different names. They have 7 names. So you read the media, it's Palestinian terrorists and Muslim freedom fighters, because they were fighting the Soviet Union. So this is how the media projected those 2 images. And of course, the Zionists have played a major role in the first part, because this lie about Israel and Palestine had to continue. So when we start looking at the role of the media, we need to pay attention to a few things. One, there are media outlets that are there as mouthpieces for the Zionists. No more, no less. So when you want to understand an issue pertaining to Palestine, that's not a place where you will get any news. I'll give you an example. The US used to have few weekly magazines, like Time Magazine, Newsweek, US Report, US and World Report. But at one point, a few years back, a Netanyahu type bought Newsweek. And from that point, it became a mouthpiece for the Zionists. So you think Newsweek is still Newsweek? No, it has changed drastically, because now it's following a certain agenda, which is brighten the image of the Zionist entity in Palestine and praise the work of Netanyahu and other extremists, and talk negatively and present a negative image about Palestine and the people of Palestine. So you will find, for example, beside Newsweek, the Telegraph of Britain, exactly the same copy. The Washington Examiner, on the same wavelength. So there are media outlets that are totally biased toward a certain issue in this regard. So when it comes to Gaza, those 3 outlets, you can see clearly the coverage in this regard. Now, there are other media outlets, like Fox News, for example, that do the same, but not that, along the same line. Once in a while, you will find something that's different there. And once in a while, you find something that you would not find it in the other ones. But Fox News, for example, has an agenda against Muslims in the US. That's obvious. Has an agenda against Palestine and the people of Palestine. That's obvious in this regard. But they do not totally shift like the others. Instead of the others being like 95 to 100%, they are like 85 to 95% in this regard. So how do we understand that part of the media role, and how do we cruise an understanding out of that? What got me, in fact, to think about, discuss this issue is when the events in Syria took place. And suddenly you start seeing, I'm talking about the Muslims, I'm not talking now about the non-Muslims. You start seeing, Muslims saying, oh, this operation is an Israeli operation, which ended up in removing Bashar al-Assad and the collapse of the regime. That the Israelis are behind this Syrian force. And the Americans are behind this. And the guesses go left and right in this regard. In fact, few got it right that this is basically a Turkish operation in terms of planning and preparation. Yes, it was done through Syrian hands, but it was a Turkish operation بامتياز يعني done very well. Now, why did people start thinking left and right and saying, some of them in fact said this is fake. The people of Bashar al-Assad and company will be back. This is just some fake news and those people are just tools and you will see this. Why? Because basically, in order to understand any issue before you go to the media, you have to have some background. You have to have some background on the issue. If you have some background on the issue, when you read the media, then you're going to distinguish between two things. Is this news or this is analysis? For example, if you read the newspaper, or if you are watching CNN, or if you are watching ABC News, you're gonna hear different perspective on different things. The first thing that you need to distinguish is what they are giving you raw news, or they are giving you an analysis. And if they are good at it, sometimes you will not distinguish. The way they present it, you will not distinguish if they are good at it. For example, if you read the New York Times, it's difficult sometimes for somebody who is not well familiar and have the background to see what is the news and what is analysis, because sometimes they give you their analysis as if it is the news, as if it is the fact, as if it is what you need to believe, what you need to think in this regard. So distinguishing between what is news and what is analysis is important. Now, the source of the news is also important. Where you are getting your news from. Many of those who initially gave judgment on Syria, basically they got from WhatsApp groups. Somebody throw this statement, Israel is behind it. Somebody throw another statement, the US is behind it, and someone throw a fourth statement that, Bashar is not gone, he will be back, this is just a trick, and this and that. This is not the news. This is he said, she said. And most of this is not really a reliable way of understanding events. Because this is social media. And social media, unless you know this person or this source, and you have a track record of reliable understanding and news, they will be just either lying to give you a certain perspective or a certain direction, or they are confused themselves and they want to pretend that they know something, which is full of in social media. That you will find, just what you need is a laptop and a connection to the internet, and you can, pretend to be the superpower of the world. And you can pretend to be able to do this and do this and do this. And definitely some have done, in the US elections, for example, one person sometimes will be able to do much within certain circles. And that is possible. Because those guys, they know who to target and they have bases. But what we are talking about with the Syria events is people were just hitting in the dark of what is this. Now, of course, there are reasons for this. How in the world did an army that has been there for, 54 years, belong to a family, collapse within a few days? So this would produce what people call conspiracy theories. You start hitting, left and right and try and say, come up with very wild understanding of things and very wild explanation of things. For example, there are some that are not really conspiracy theories, it's valid arguments. Who controls US foreign policy? Is it the Israeli lobby or the US government? I mean, this is a valid discussion in this regard. But when you start seeing, oh, there's a group of Jews that run this country, that become an utter nonsense in this regard. It's just something that somebody wrote somewhere and transmitted in this regard. Sometimes the way that the media give you the news, they give you raw news. And it's true. We have seen, for example, those white supremacists who went out and the whole, the US, whoever watched that video, have seen in there where those white guys saying, Jews will not replace us, Jews will not replace us, Jews will not replace us. And of course there was, an outcry. Who are those people? What this anti-Semitic clearly, and what add to this is, at that point, the president said there are good people there. President Trump said there are good people there. Now, why, despite we have many raw news about Trump from the media, mainstream media, and from social media, statements that are clearly anti-Semitic, why would the Jewish leadership in America not take a stand? For obvious reasons. Because they think that he will be good for the Zionist entity in Palestine. That he will do good for the Israeli occupation in Palestine. And you will find some of them saying, yeah, he said these things, but. You have always this but. So although the media is telling you, look, this is racist, this guy is anti-Semitic, this guy is really, clearly, some of the statements and some of the people that he associates with, like Kanye West and others before, are clearly anti-Semitic. But you wonder why, the leadership of the Jewish establishment in America are not really taking this issue seriously in this regard and pointing to him and calling him. Again, they think that he will be of benefit to them, so let's not pick up a fight with him. But for us, when we want to look at events and judge events, we would need to take out our own biases. Let's say that, you have been someone who is supportive of Abu Muhammad al-Julani in the past 15, 20 years. So no matter what comes with Abu Muhammad al-Julani, the new name, of course, for him is Ahmad al-Shara', you are not willing to entertain any negative news because you already set to believe that whatever comes from him is good. This will contaminate your opinion and will contaminate the way that you see things. Because he is just bashar, just like anybody else. He will have his pluses and he will have his minuses. If you insist that whatever comes is always positive, there is a problem in that. And it will color your view on things that he will do, and people will say, look, this is wrong. No, it can't be. You have to understand, and you will keep justifying things in this regard. Or sometimes you have this wishful thinking that things is going in this direction. You have just deep belief that it's going in this direction, and you want to convince yourself and then convince others. So it's not that you are only, messing up your own view of things and understanding, you are even transferring it to others, and others are messing, things up in this regard. So far, we have seen, as I said, the shift that happened from mainstream media to the social media effect. And we give a big example in terms of the Jews, the young Jews in America, in this regard. I will say a little more about that, in a minute. And we have seen how social media is not just became a place to disseminate news and views. It also became a factor in getting people together to organize and to do things in this regard. Now, let's talk about how each outlet cover the news, taking into account their own agenda. For example, 10 days ago or so, a Saudi doctor, psychiatrist, in Germany, he drove his, or I guess he rented a van, and he drove it and killed so many people and injured so many people in Germany. Right? Everyone, I assume, heard about this. Right? Now, in the first few days, you go and read Al Arabiya news outlet. There is nothing there. There's nothing that says he's a Saudi. Although all the other outlet, Arabic, English, and even the Israeli, everybody, a Saudi doctor, a Saudi doctor, a Saudi doctor, a Saudi doctor. But Al Arabiya said a doctor. I mean, come on. I mean, to what extent? I mean, this is something. Of course, I did not follow up with them 3-4 days later. I'm not sure if they still say a doctor or they said that, a Saudi. Why? Because for them, they want to give always a positive image of their sponsor. Similarly, because the Saudis start having good relationship with the Zionists, the same outlet, when it came to Gaza, will give the Israeli perspective. I mean, we have seen cases where a school is bombed, and everyone is saying that the Israeli bombed this UN school, except this, the Arabs called it Al-Ibriya, the Hebrew, for being a Hebrew channel. They said Hamas bombed that school. And even the Israeli media, only the extreme part would say this. The one that is fair would look at it differently in this regard. So you would see how this thing is serving a certain agenda. This brings us to the most important outlet, which is Al Jazeera. When it comes to the Middle East and the source of news from Syria and Gaza, the most influential news channel is Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera is a Qatari news outlet. You rarely would hear anything even negative about Qatar, because again, this is their sponsors. This is the one that pays for the station and for its expenses and for its outreach and so on and so forth. But you will find in Al Jazeera the mix of pan-Arabism with Islam. And that's why they appeal to the masses. They are not the traditional Arabists. Abdel Nasser Arabism and the Ba'ath Arabism and Assad Arabism and Saddam Arabism. That's not what it is. It's not that, secular, anti-religious, Arabism. So you will find in their coverage this aspect of the so-called pan-Arabism, which have this mix with Islam. And you could see clearly why countries like Egypt will ban Al Jazeera. They will not allow them to function. Even the Palestinian Authority now want to ban Al Jazeera. Because Al Jazeera has been covering the issues pertaining to the average person in the Middle East. And they have been so popular because basically people rely on their coverage. They are in the middle of the action. You will find them, of course, because they are not really after profits. There's a royal family that support them financially. So you will find them having correspondence all over the place. Whenever something takes place in Gaza, they are within meters or a kilometer away. Same thing in the West Bank. And same thing now with Syria. So do they have an agenda? Of course they have an agenda. They are promoting the issue of, for example, Palestine. They are promoting the new quote unquote regime in Syria. That's clear. If you listen to their coverage in this regard, it's clear where their heart is and where their mind is. That's not something that is hidden. In the old days, they were in Afghanistan and they were covering the Afghan war against what the US was, propagating. Same thing with Iraq. They were covering the atrocities of the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, to the point that George Bush had contact with the Emir of Qatar that, lowered the tone of Al Jazeera. Because it was creating, there's no doubt, that it was creating a flood of jihadis. I mean, in Iraq, according to the New York Times, one of the main sources of jihadis came from a town in Morocco, where basically, according to the New York Times, it's a place where they were young drug users. And they said, people start approaching them, you're a Muslim. What is it that you're doing with your life? Your brothers are being slaughtered in Iraq and the Muslims killed in Afghanistan. Why don't you do something to straighten your life and do something that you can be proud of and do something that pleases Allah and so on and so forth. And out of that came a flood. I mean, the New York Times once reported that they got to a place where there was 75 volunteers, a good number of them from Morocco, waiting to take a truck and explode it among the American soldiers in Iraq. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a machinery behind this. And similarly, when you see Gaza and the events in Gaza, look in the past few days, the Israelis have got to really a very new law, burning part of this hospital, Kamal Udwan Hospital, and taking out all the patients and all the doctors, arresting more than 240 people, and they have been bombing the surrounding of the Al Jazeera, have been covering extensively. It's always on the first page. Now, if you come and says, I tried it today and said, let me see how the international media is covering it. If you go to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, you really need to dig to find something. It's not in your face. Because for them, this is not something that they want to promote. The time when Gaza was a major news, there was a time. And the international media covered it. But we have noticed, recently in the last few months, that there is this dip in the coverage of many of those Western outlets. Not, of course, Al Jazeera. Because that's still, it was focused from day one, it's still a focus in there. So that's why, when somebody asks, where can we get the news? Definitely Al Jazeera is a source. BBC is another source. Because BBC is more, I would trust them a little more than the American media in this regard. So understanding who is sponsoring a certain outlet is also important in this regard. Now, I said earlier we'll talk a little more about what we call those American Zionists who become in the Israeli army or become settlers. If you ask a typical Palestinian, who are the worst settlers? Who are the worst soldiers in the Israeli army? They will tell you it's the American Jewish soldiers and the American Jewish settlers. They are the worst. Now, why they are the worst, I gave you a background. Those people were brainwashed, totally brainwashed, to think that Israel is this best place that happened to humanity, and the Palestinians, they have only one objective: kill the Jews, which is, of course, utter nonsense. It's the other way around. It's the other way around. They have been killing Palestinians all along, before the October 7, in this regard. They took their land, and they took their water, they took their resources in this regard. But when you have this generation, before the the social media time, and before the effects start coming to the young, the truth after the October 7, now you have a major movement that is a headache to the Zionists in the US and in Israel. What to do with hundreds of thousands of young Jews who says now we have found the truth? For those who are not familiar, let me tell you this. If you go to Palestine and you wanted to move from the area where the bulk of the Palestinians live, which is the West Bank, before you enter it, there's a big sign in your face, big sign that says danger, danger. Entering the Palestinian territory is dangerous for the Jews. Don't enter. I mean, just by you seeing that sign, just emphasize what they have been taught all along those years. And now increasingly, excuse me, increasingly we see young Jews who cross and go and talk to people from Palestine and see the reality and come out and say, we have been lied to all along. We have been deceived all along. Why? I will tell you the effect of social media. Because they have seen others going, and they have seen the experience of others, and people start, oh, I have a bunch of friends here, why don't we go? And they start even doing some kind of demonstration. At one point, they block the entrance to Damascus Gate, Bab al-Amud, in this regard. So they have to come up with different ways. Now, what are their tools? They prepare them before they get to college. They said, basically, you're going to go to college, and you're going to hear about Israel 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how you respond, 1, 2, 3, 4. Because they know this is a new reality. You no longer can keep the lies. I mean, people have seen genocide in Gaza. Human rights organizations are saying genocide in Gaza. The Pope is saying we should investigate genocide in Gaza. We have seen the Israeli government so upset with the Irish government that they closed the Israeli embassy in Ireland. We have seen the ICC, International Criminal Court, calling Netanyahu and Gallant war criminals in this regard. So how much you can, cover the truth? You cannot continue the lies on the old. They have to come up with new tricks. And that's why the traditional media does not really play a major role anymore with those young generation. They have to have special programs for them. One of the major Zionists, one of those jerks who have been, anti-Palestinian all those years, and Zionists to the core, is saying basically we need to deal with this phenomenon. We might have lost those people forever in this regard, because they have seen that they are no longer believe your lies. Imagine in like a country in Palestine, Imagine when a family want to give the image, teach their children, we are people with the resistance. We have been against the occupation and this and this and that and keep talking this and one day one of them ventured to the school and says, we are this, and the guy said, look, everybody in town knows that you guys are traitors. Everybody in town knows this. So this is exactly a similar situation where their eyes were totally closed to the reality that they are criminals, that the American Zionists are perpetrating the crimes in Palestine. The Jewish in America are two camps. One camp is a Zionist trying no matter what. I mean, they will tell you, they are not hiding, that we are there to protect Israel from whatever. Let them kill as many people as they want to kill. Let them do this. The point is we need to protect this entity. And they are not hiding from it. And they would use, their own news outlets. As I said, in the 70s, 80s, it was mostly Palestinian terrorists. Palestinian terrorists. Whenever you hear the word Palestine, it is with the word terrorist. And whenever you hear the Afghani resistance, it's the freedom fighters. Until, of course, the last Russian soldiers withdrew from Afghanistan in the late 80s. I still remember it. That the editorial of the New York Times said, oh, those people are the extremists. I mean, they have been calling them freedom fighters all along. But now the term has changed. Suddenly those are fundamentalists. Fundamentalists. I mean, the term terrorist came a little later on. Another example that I can give also of the effect of the media, if you are to see the media in the US, radio, paper, newspaper, television, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, there was a term that was very, very common in the media. And that term was black, what? Muslims. Black Muslims. Black Muslims. So the image that you give to the average American, that Islam is associated with blackness. When they talk about Malcolm X, the black Muslims. When they talk about the Nation of Islam, the black Muslims. Just put this barrier between the American society and Islam by saying this thing is a black thing. Well, long and behold, eventually they start seeing how white is King Fahd and how white is Hafez al-Assad and how white is Hosni Mubarak, and the narration start different. And we have been in the past 34 years with this term Islamic terrorists, Muslim terrorism, Islamic terrorism. I mean, this is not a coincidence. Why Islam is no longer the black thing? Because this thing served the purpose for a while. For a while, it served the purpose that this thing is a black thing. Don't even look at Islam as an option. And later on, and by the way, in both cases, the media played a major role. Black Muslims, black Muslims, black Muslims, Islamic terrorism, terrorist Muslims, and so on and so forth. You will find this narrative. But with the social media, well, there's a new outlet. I mean, people start seeing, wow, there is something in there. Because the moment that, if you try to protect your son or your daughter from something, said, don't listen to it. Don't do it. Don't go that way. Don't go close. This is very dangerous. This is this. And it may serve for a while until somebody will come and says, well, that's not the case. Maybe you need to look at this or look at that. And that's why, although we as Muslims in this country have lost hundreds of thousands of Muslims out of our faith, unfortunately, Islam is still maintained the same number and did not lose followers. Like every other religion in America lost followers except Islam. But not because we did not lose, because we got so many who accepted Islam and converted to Islam that they offset the number that left. Because there's no longer one venue that would control the narratives of what this Islam is all about. You can just go and to any website and seek information to the point that you find some churches and some others have started putting information. If you start reading it, it looks like some Muslims putting it. But if you go deeper, you know that it's a fake. And the aim of it is really to get you away from Islam, not even to continue the reading in this regard. Shifting gears to the Middle East, one of the main tools of the governments, as we said in the Middle East, are the media. And with the media come the shuyukh, the mashayikh of the governments. You know, they call them scholars for dollars. Now you will find them being promoted on satellite TV. I mean, we know in the old days, before the satellite TV, you will find some of them, for example, in the constitution in Syria, you could not become a president unless you are a Muslim. That's what the old constitution says. So for Hafez al-Assad to be a president, Ahmed Kiftaro, one of his mamsaha tools, gave the fatwa that Hafez al-Assad is a Muslim. Now this Kiftaro is the religious cover of the regime. In Syria, always have been religious cover until recently, and presented in the media. Imagine the Mufti of Syria go to Moscow for a visit during the time of Hafez al-Assad. And of course, the media there, being the Soviet Union, pretending to be a communist nation, they told him, look, in an interview, the religions are full of nonsense. He said, that's true, but Islam is the least among them of nonsense. He said, that's true, but Islam is the least of nonsense. And the media would report this, because the regime does not want to promote Islam. He's using him as a cover. So when something like this, suddenly it's in the news. He was asked, what's the difference between Christianity and Islam? He said, in Islam, we say mjaddara. In Christianity, they say rice, lentil, and onion. For those who do not know, mjaddara is a Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian dish. It's composed of rice, lentil, and onions. So he's saying, there's no difference. They say lentil, rice, 3. We say 1 mjaddara in this regard. Again, this will be reported in the media in this regard. Even after Kiftara, who have been, as I said, mamsaha for Hafez al-Assad and a tool, unfortunately, that he was used by the regime, when his replacement came, Hassoun. Again, the regime have to have a coverage, a religious coverage. And the media always would show in Jum'ah Hassoun sitting next to Bashar al-Assad. But at the same time, you will see some of outrageous statements. For example, he says, Syria has 18 million Christians, I am one of them. This is in public, on video, published. He would say, also published, if Muhammad asked me not to believe in Moses and Jesus, I will make kufr of Muhammad. This is the Mufti. This is the Mufti of the country. Despite all of this, Bashar al-Assad got to a point that says, we no longer need a Mufti. So he removed him and said, we are forming a council. And I think this has to do with the influence of Iran. Because as long as there's a Sunni figure in Syria to be the Mufti, it just gives an impression of what this country is. So at one point, I mean, think about it, Bashar got to the point with all what Hassoun have done, that he said, we no longer need your services. And they form a council, and long and behold, the whole system collapsed. Not, of course, because of that part, but he felt safe. You know, Sisi, Ibn Zayed, Ibn Salman, all those, they have those shuyukh to cover for them and give fatwa left and right. Bashar felt, I do not need it in this regard. Oh, subhanAllah. Okay, for the sake of time, let me close with this subject and then we'll see if there are questions or comments. When we look, going back to the issue of Syria, when the events took place, we said that there was news coming from news outlets. And for someone to make a judgment, you have to have some background. So that's why, for example, when somebody will come and say, you know, this thing was done this way or that way or that way, on what basis? Now, anyone who knows the ABC of the situation in Syria before the recent events knows that all those armed young men were protected by Turkey. That's a fact. That's a fact. This is not an analysis. This is a fact that at one point 80% of Syria was under the rebels. And then Iran and Hezbollah came and they were able to push the rebels to the corner in the north on the Turkish border. We said, remember, that it took Hezbollah and Iran and the Syrian army then 4 years to get Halab back, Aleppo. But they lost it in 3 days. And definitely, as I said, the circumstances will get people to start, you know, talking. But when you want to understand events, you have to have some facts. You have to understand a background. Where did those people come from? They did not just come from the sky. And they did not come from outside the country. They were in an enclave within Idlib, on the borders with Turkey. Those are the same people that fought the government after 2011 and beyond, when the army, Syrian army, disintegrated. And when they were ended up in this part of the country, Idlib, there was an agreement between Russia and Turkey that they will be limited to that place. And Turkey will take care of protecting them. I mean, that is a background that anyone who wants to understand what took place need to understand that part. And then need to understand, why do we have 6 different armies in Syria? We had 6 different armies in Syria. The US army was there, the Russian army was there, the Iranian army was there, the Turkish army was there, the Israeli army was there, and the Syrian army was there. What is this complication that a country like Syria will have those 6 different armies in it? And which army at one point was defending the regime? The Iranian army. Of course, we did not count Hezbollah because it's not the country, although Hezbollah was a major factor in defending Bashar, and really from the brink. The system almost collapsed if it was not for Hezbollah and Iran, and then Russia with the air cover. Now, the fact that the army have collapsed in a few days is something that indeed it was not something that was widely anticipated. And that's what produced those, all sort of conspiracies and theories of what had happened. But the moment that you start getting some sense of news, you will understand why the army collapsed. And I gave an example in Khutbah al-Jum'ah of this soldier who was in the Hama area. In an interview with the CNN, he said, we were 10 soldiers in that post. And as you know, there will be 10 Sunni soldiers. And of course, the leaders are Alawis. So he said, 7 of us have money. So they bribe the leader so they will not come to service. So basically, whoever have a store will go and work in his store. Whoever have a farm will go in his farm. So they do not come to their position. So he said, we were 3. When the rebels came, we just threw our weapons and left. And I mean, that is a good indication of, okay. Another one is Bashar announcing the second day of the events, I'm going to raise the salary by 50%. Then you ask, what was their salary? $30. Now $45. I mean, it just shows you that he is out of touch. There is nothing to fight for, because as we said again, that the bulk of the soldiers are Sunnis. But what was a factor that's no longer a factor is help from outside. Iran made it clear, we are not willing to do the fight for you. If your army is not fighting, we are not going to do the fight for you. When there was an army fighting, Iran came in support. Hezbollah came in support. Of course, the circumstances are different. But the reality is, as was put by the foreign minister, that basically the army collapsed. And he said in a talk with Bashar, Bashar was wondering why the army is not fighting in this regard. Now, this news came from the Iranian foreign minister directly. So it's not an analysis. He's saying, this is what Bashar said. I do not know why my army is not fighting. Although it should be clear for any stupid person why the army was not fighting in this regard. So in summary, I would say that the media plays a major role in forming public opinion and public feelings on issues in this regard. With social media, there's a big change and shift in the way people get their news in this regard. And it's important that when we try to understand an event, we need to distinguish between what's news and what's analysis. And we need to also distinguish between the sources that come from outlet, as we mentioned, that they are known for their position and for their lies, like the Washington Examiner and the Newsweek and the Telegraph and so on and so forth. Believe it or not, the Israeli media is much more accurate in terms of covering events, although they have their own lies compared with those three outlets in this regard. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring in the khair and the good for this ummah. Allahumma ameen. Any comment or question, inshallah, before we close? Okay, جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت